Good afternoon, everyone. I call this April 11th, 2024 Jacksonville Water and Sewer Advisory Committee meeting to order. Mr. Hart, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do.
Thank you. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda items? Are there any discussions? Hearing none, I'll accept the motion to accept the agenda.
All right, I'll make a motion, we accept the agenda.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Agenda adopted. Has everyone had a chance to review last month's meeting minutes? Are there any omissions or corrections to these minutes? Hearing none, I'll accept the motion to accept the minutes as written.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All right, thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Minutes approved. All right, so we'll start the meeting, and we have a special guest, and we'll turn it over to Mr. Hanson.
Good evening, Chairman, Committee. We appreciate your attention this evening and coming out to discuss the system development fees. As you'll recall, we talked about our CIP at last meeting, and you supported that. And we talked about how that's funded, and we talked about how that we fund that through various methods, whether that be user fees or rates that people pay as part of their water and sewer bill every month, system development fees, which is what developers pay to buy in for the capacity they use in our system, where that's a one-time payment. And then we also talked about how we have agreements or small service areas that we've done also to support water and sewer growth and where we recover those costs. So that with that, tonight we're going to talk to you about system development fees. Just as a reminder, this is a one-time fee that typically builders or developers pay as they pull a building permit to build something. The easiest example is a new house. So if you have a vacant lot, you bring your plans to the city, you submit your plans to construct a house, and there are water and sewer mains available for that home to connect to. But more importantly, there's also capacity in conveyance and treatment for water and sewer to serve that house. So this is, there's a cost to building that infrastructure. So this is a way to help recover that cost so it's not completely borne by the ratepayers themselves. So as you'll recall, when we did our, technically our second study, but our study required by law, general statute went into effect about 6-7 years ago that required system development fees to have an analysis. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And for those to be adopted by the city. Along with that, there are criteria. So in order, the city adopted ours back in 2018. We recognize that it's time for us to update that, so we put out an RFP, a request for proposals, to select a consultant that met the requirements of that, and there are specific requirements to provide that analysis. And we actually selected Wildan Financial Services. The office is out of Orlando, Florida. And Mr. Daryl Parker is with us today to present to you the process, or where we are in the process, and the findings that we have. And we also did this earlier today. We actually invited members of the development community in, gave them the exact same presentation, and gave them an opportunity to comment as well. And then at the end, we'll kind of go over what the next steps are. So with that, I'd like to introduce Daryl, or let him introduce himself. He is our principal consultant for this project. He has been involved at ground level all the way through, so he can answer any questions that you may have. So with that, Daryl?
Thank you, Wally. All right, as Wally mentioned, I'm Daryl Parker with Wildan Financial Services, and the purpose of this meeting, are we going to introduce around or just?
No, just.
Okay, you guys all know each other. My purpose here tonight is to show you the study, what we've done, what we've developed as far as what we're calling the calculated fees for now. They're not proposed yet until we get sufficient feedback. But that's what we're here for, is to show you what we've done, show you the results, get feedback from you as the advisory committee, and then Wally will address next steps after that. So, and this is meant to be informal. If you have questions as we go along, just stop me and we'll answer them right there.
Okay.
So basically, the system development fees in North Carolina, there is a governing law that kind of defines the purpose of the fee and the methodology, and we're going to address all those. As Wally mentioned, this is for new development, and kind of the best example is like a new house or a new subdivision, that type of thing. Basically, it's to recover costs associated with growth, building additional capacity in treatment facilities, extending lines, that type of thing. So there's, as I mentioned, the law kind of outlines and defines certain procedures. Some of the main things is it's got to be done by a financial professional. That's where we come in as Wildan. It's not something that you can now, up until the adoption of the law back in 2017, you could have done this in-house. Now that's not the way it's done anymore. The primary components that I'd like to address on this slide, it's you have to have a capital improvement plan, a CIP as we're calling it here. It's got to be a minimum 5-year plan, maximum 20-year plan. The plan that you guys have developed in-house is 11 years. And so that's just kind of the way the timing was on the projects. And we'll talk more about the CIP as we go along. There is a 45-day posting period, meaning after we get feedback from all of you and I get back to the office on Monday, we'll start working on a report, and that report will be submitted, reviewed, and then once we're all in agreement, yeah, this is the one, it gets posted on the city's website for 45 days. That is part of the legal requirement. And so it's basically there for any kind of public feedback. I've actually never gotten any public feedback from those postings, but that is part of the requirement. And so if there are any changes that need to be made, we make them before it goes to a final resolution process. And it does have to be updated every 5 years. So that's kind of where we are now. You guys did this about 5 years ago, and now it's time to make that adjustment. So we'll talk a little bit about the current situation and kind of where things are right now and your capital program. So your current SDFs, as we'll refer to them, system development fees, right now you've got a fee structure that is based on the size of the connection, separated by water and wastewater. This is right in line with industry standards. The purpose of incrementing the fee for larger connections is those larger connections place more demand on your system. Basically, you have to reserve and have available more capacity for them. And since this is a capacity-related fee, that's a good industry basis for incrementing those charges. And we'll show you more detail on that as we go along. We're going to focus on the 5/8 inch, the total of 6165, because that's your typical residential customer and the majority of your new development. So if we look at that current fee compared to some of the other utilities in the area, you can see right now Jacksonville falls kind of right in the middle. and a little bit below that average bar that's an average for this comparison group, not like a statewide average or anything. So that's a good spot to be in. That's kind of one of those things that you don't want to be the highest, you don't want to be the lowest. Being right in the middle is a good spot. So then, obviously, as we move along, you'll see, well, with the adjustments from the analysis, where does that put us? And you won't be disappointed. So the capital improvement program, basically what we're looking at is, like I said, that 11-year adopted capital plan. So we've got a total CIP, and those projects are listed line by line, and there's identifiable water projects and wastewater projects. For our purpose in the study, we've summarized those into either treatment-related facilities or transmission/collection-related facilities. We just use transmission to be common terminology between the two. So you can see we've got a total column, and then we've got an excluded column, and we'll get into some of the reasons why those are excluded. And then we've got what we're focused on is that far right column, the recoverable capital costs. The purpose of this is not every project that you're doing is included, should be included for recovery in the SDF. There's several reasons. One might be if there are projects that are developer funded and contributed. Since you don't pay for those, you don't recover those. We'll see kind of some other lists of these, but for example, renewal and replacement projects where you're not adding capacity, those get excluded. So what we're focused on are the projects that are expanding your system or upgrading your system. So we'll talk about the methodology, and this is defined in the legal verbiage itself, but it's also right out of our standard industry guideline, if you will, is American Water Works Association, AWWA. And so these, the state law actually pretty much pulled these methodologies right out of that standard. So we've got two bases to apply. We say, okay, the state requires this, and the industry has adopted this as well. So we've got the buy-in method. The buy-in method looks at your existing assets, the existing lines and plants and just facilities that you already have out there. And the fact that there's still capacity available, we want to capture the cost of that capacity for those assets. The incremental marginal cost method, that looks at the CIP. We've addressed the CIP a little bit, and we're going to talk more detail about that. Because what you're doing in your CIP, as we mentioned, you're building new capacity to facilitate that future growth. And then there's a combined method, which is kind of the hybrid method. It's a blend of the two, which is what we've developed here, because you're capturing both the existing capacity costs and future capacity costs. So the existing assets on the water system that we include for recovery, we look at anything that's related to water supply, water treatment, storage, the major lines, the big lines. We're not looking to recover the small lines in the subdivisions and that type of thing, and any major pumping facilities of any kind. On the sewer system, similarly, we're looking at the big, what we refer to as kind of the backbone of your system, the assets and the facilities that pretty much provide service to everybody in the system. So, we're looking at those major lines and force mains, the lift stations, the flow basins, and the treatment and disposal facilities. And Wally was addressing the group earlier, was talking a lot about your disposal and the irrigation disposal system, and I'll let you discuss it when it comes up, but that's a big part of your operations and your focus on the sewer system. As I mentioned, we exclude some things, both from the existing and the CIP, like we talked about. So we exclude developer-contributed facilities. As we mentioned, if the city didn't pay for it, you can't include it for recovery. Now, it's still your asset, but there's no cost incurred. The small local lines, distribution, collection, we don't include those because they're specific to certain customers and areas. They're not system-wide assets. Meters, obviously, very specific. Anything that's just in a neighborhood and only serves that neighborhood. Anything that's grant funded. If you've got same kind of concept with the developers. If the city didn't pay for it, then we don't recover it. And we'll talk a little bit about that. You're getting some grant money on the sewer side, and that money has, in our analysis, you won't see it in this presentation, but when we provide a report, it'll be obvious that grant money is being pulled out, and it shows up in that column of excluded from the CIP. So if we're talking about the CIP, the recoverable assets, and we've kind of already addressed this, anything that adds capacity or anything that materially upgrades your system. Capacity, typically, your demand might be somewhat linear, but your capacity really isn't. Like treatment facility, for example, you can't just add 1 MGD every time new development is in. You kind of build it in chunks. The system upgrades, these are things that are either improving your operating efficiency, might even be things that will lower your operating costs. Or they might be driven by the government. They might be regulatory requirements, more strict and stringent regulations on chemicals and that type of thing. So we can include those projects for recovery as well. For the CIP, the things that we have pulled out, anything I mentioned, renewal and replacement, that's basically where, if you're having to replace a line because it's 50 years old and just is deteriorated, needs to be replaced, but you're putting in the same size line in there, you've not added capacity, you've not added any additional benefit that would support growth. The other things we leave out, you can kind of see here, vehicles and equipment. Those are operating assets. They're not really capacity-related assets. Administrative facilities, and here again, anything that we anticipate being funded by either a grant or a developer. So here's kind of a summary of the recoverable costs. You can see at the top we've got the existing assets, and the way we here again, there's a lot of detail behind this that's in our analysis model, that too much to put in a presentation. But basically, we take the asset listing that you currently have on the books. We take the original cost, we escalate that to today's dollars based on indices, valuation indices, and the year placed in service and all that. And then we make an adjustment for the depreciation and basically come up with what we call replacement cost new less depreciation. It's kind of a valuation tool. So we've talked a little bit about your capital program, your CIP. Here again, we've got everything separated out between water and wastewater, and we've got things broken out between treatment and transmission. Part of the reason we do the treatment transmission separation is because what we're ultimately shooting here is shooting for the cost per gallon of capacity, and those assets, those facilities have different capacities. So we can't just lump them together. So we come up with a combined recoverable cost, and you see the $177 million there. Oh, there we go. Nice. And so those are the dollars that ultimately are applied in our analysis. So here's kind of a visual. We've got the existing recoverable assets, which is the buy-in method. We've got the CIP projects that we've included for recovery, which is the incremental cost method. And then we've got the combined, we pull those together. And so we've got a total recoverable cost. But then we also make some adjustments. There's a couple credits that we apply. There's a debt service credit, which is the current outstanding balance on any water and sewer related debt. And the reason for that adjustment is so that debt has been used to fund some of the existing assets. The payment for that debt, though, is paid through your budget process through the user rates, the monthly user rates that customers pay. So our intent is to avoid double recovery by charging somebody those dollars in their SDF and then them connecting to the system and paying that debt again and through their user rates. May not be a perfect process, but it's an acknowledgement that, yeah, we need to do our best to avoid any double recovery. And then there's also required by law a 25% CIP credit. So we make an adjustment there. And so with those two credits, we come up with our net recoverable costs. And this is what that looks like. You'll remember the 177 million from the other slide. And then we've got we'll combine the credits in here, but in the analysis model, they're separated out. So the combined credits bring that number down. So now we've got our net capital costs that we're going to include in the recovery calculation. And that's the 129. Here's a visual of that. Basically, as I mentioned, our ultimate goal is to come up with a cost per gallon of capacity. So we take our costs, and you saw they're separated between treatment and transmission, and then treatment has a capacity number, transmission has a capacity number, so we divide the costs by the capacity and come up with a cost per gallon of capacity. At this point, the math becomes pretty easy. So we see there our recoverable assets, our recoverable facilities, and they're separated out. We divide so the capacity numbers for treatment, those are basically documented and permitted. So we know those numbers. We make some adjustments for things, for example, on the water side, line loss, for example, because that's a real number, and that's an amount of capacity that is not available to future customers. Same thing on the sewer side, we make an adjustment for inflow and infiltration, I&I. And so that's where those numbers come from. Now, on the transmission side, those numbers are not documented. So we use kind of factors of the treatment amounts, knowing that there's at least as much transmission capacity as there is treatment capacity. And so with those numbers, here again, we just do the division, come up with a cost per gallon of capacity for each component, and then add those together. Here's a visual of what that looks like. So we take that cost per gallon of capacity, and then we, to come up with the fee, we apply a level of service to that. And the level of service that the city currently utilizes for its planning purposes is 360 gallons per day, both for water and for wastewater. So what we're doing here is we're taking that cost per gallon of capacity, multiplying it times the 360, and gives us our SDF per ERU, per equivalent residential unit, separately for water and wastewater. And I'll show you what that looks like. So here's the comparison of the existing fee that we saw earlier, the combined 61.65, and the currently calculated fee. As you can see, the water went up some, the sewer went down some. Net difference is only $5 from where you are now. I've actually not seen that happen before, but as Wally was telling the other group earlier today, we believe that that's primarily the reason that wastewater didn't go up is because you guys got a big grant. And obviously, if we need to address that in more detail, but I think that's what caused that adjustment. Without that grant money, that wastewater number would have gone up as well.
That grant money is figured in to your figures.
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if you remember, the largest project we have is the Western Regional on our CIP right now. And Senator Lazara got the city $20 million in grant funding to help with that project. So that $20 million is backed out. We would have otherwise bond funded that $20 million. So because we're not having to borrow that money, we now don't recover that money because we didn't have to expend it. So that's why you're seeing, that's the biggest change in wastewater. So you can see it, not only does it have an impact in our CIP, it has an impact in the cost of our recovery of system development fees too.
That's what's so important, to get all this grant money possible then,
That's right.
to apply for everything.
That's right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of grant money out there right now. So, I mean, and, sometimes, a city like Jacksonville may not be eligible, but to get a $20 million grant, that was very, very good. I mean, that helps out a bunch. I mean, that helps out not only on these fees, but also the monthly user rates, because as Wally mentioned, that was probably going to be bond funded. That would have added $20 million more dollars to your debt service. And so that keeps your rates down.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody in Jacksonville here appreciates all that, because obviously
They should.
they definitely do, trust me.
Well, and I think if you'll get back for just a second, even if you took that out at 111, 116, that's not significant changes when you're talking water and sewer funding for capacity projects, for growth type projects. And for the capacity that we currently have available at our treatment plants, I think that's also a testament to the process that we go through every year with updating our CIP, maintaining our rate model, and making sure that we appropriately plan and adjust projects to try to best time them. So, but the savings there is definitely a result of that grant funding.
One more question. This is
Yes,
probably
sir.
a little crazy, but you figures that you at 177 million total. Is that based on a 10-year factor, 1-year factor? What is that based on?
That's based on the current value of your existing assets and the capital costs that you're planning for over that 11-year planning horizon.
Yeah. And the 11-year would be the year we're currently doing, where we were finishing up
Right.
some projects that don't roll into the next CIP, the next 10-year window, and that 10-year window. So that's why he's saying 11-year. We have a 10-year CIP, but we also factor in the projects that we're currently working on that don't flow into that.
Right, yeah, because we want to capture those construction and progress projects as well.
Thank you.
So we talked a little bit about the fee structure. So what we're doing here is we're taking, so the calculated the 2915 and 3255, and that becomes our fee per ERU, per equivalent residential unit. And so we put those there we go.
Right there and right there.
And so for equivalent residential unit purposes, those become our factor of 1. The other factors that you see there in the meter factor column, those come out of American Water Works Association manuals. And basically what it's saying is that a 3/4 inch meter can basically get 1.5 times more water through it than the 5/8 inch, so they get a demand factor of 1.5, and then 1 inch is 2.5, and so forth. So all we're doing there is just applying those factors, those equivalency factors to the 2915 and the 3255, which is exactly what you do now. Here again, it's consistent with American Water Works Association standards, and it's a defensible basis for incrementing those fees. we can always point right to the standards and say that's how that works. And those factors, it's my understanding, those are engineering based. Those are based on how much flow can go through those meters. And so it's physics, basically. So if we look at that, since obviously we didn't change much, we only changed $5, so we didn't really change our bar location at all. Still right in the middle, still below the average. That's, here again, not a bad spot to be in. And I'll turn it back over to Wally for next steps.
So for moving forward, you kind of have seen the presentation on, what the rate analysis will show, the system development fee analysis will show. So based on, questions that we heard this morning and any questions that you may have, Daryl will go back and he and his team will finish up the report, get those to us. There are some things that we need to look through and make sure that we've incorporated everything into so there's no surprises. And then we will advertise that for a 45-day public comment period. What the general statute says is that it has to be advertised on the city's website and that written comments must be allowed to be submitted. So we'll have a place where they can target those written comments, which will be Roy. Because he's the project manager for this project. And then we will take those and while we're in that 45-day comment period, we will go to council with a workshop very similar to the presentation you saw today, and basically give them an update of where we are because they haven't seen this yet. And then we'll finish out that 45-day comment period. We will take any comments that we receive, if we receive any comments that we received from council during the discussion. We will take that back. We will include it in the analysis, make any changes as necessary, and then we will bring it to city council at a formal council meeting for a public hearing, which is also required by law, by the general statute. And then from there, if council, based on what happens at the public comment period, sometimes council's comfortable moving forward immediately following closing the public comment period. Or if there's comments or things that need to be considered, they may choose to ask staff to go back for additional information and consider that at another meeting. So we're still at least a good 45 days out before we ever implement or look at changing our system development fees. One thing I would like to go back to is this is, while it says proposed, technically this is the supported amount. This is what the analysis and the model shows that we support. And while we do love to show this, where do we compare to other people? Because it does matter to the development community, whether you're high or low, or is it more expensive to build, or because it goes into the figure of the cost. We also need to remember that each one of these are based on their system, their capacity, what they're spending. So it is expected that we would be different from Omwassa, who is immediately adjacent to us, because they're facing different challenges than we are, and they may have, additional growth needs than we do. So while this is a great comparison, it's not they're higher than us, so we can now increase. This is the supported rate based on the structure. Council could say we're willing to give a discount, which means we could lower our fee, but the analysis does not show that they could adopt a higher fee just because we're not, equal to Omwassa or somebody adjacent to us. And then the other piece of this that I'll share and I used this analogy earlier, you know, when you use this as a funding tool along with the rates that ratepayers pay every month, you know, it's basically like a seesaw. And if you have the monthly rate on one side, and you have system development fees on the other, if you begin to lower system development fees, so it encourages, you know, construction, then what has to happen is you still need that capacity, you still have that cost. So now as you lower this side's gonna go up slightly. All right, so what we're showing here is a balance between that. Development's picking up with this calculation, its cost to the system, and then the ratepayers are picking up their cost for the system. So I did want to share that, you know, 6170 is kind of basically if we were to adopt that and council move forward with that, that's what the model supports. We can't just arbitrarily say, well, I think we should charge 7,000, because that's not what our model supports. We could go to 6, but we would open ourselves up for challenge if we said, well, we need to go to 7. So just food for thought. You know, we had the stakeholders that are the ones that will pay as they develop. Today, they got the same presentation you got. They'll get the opportunity to review. I told them I'd be more than happy to email them a copy of the report once we have it. And there were some questions, and we answered those as they were here. But you're the Citizen Advisory Committee to the council. So now I will ask you, we will bring this back to you, but we will ask you at a future meeting, you know, your input on what you would recommend to the council that they support, whether that's the maximum supported, which is what you did the last time, that's that 61, 65, or whether you would recommend something less than that. So you will get an opportunity to see the final outcome as we prepare for that public hearing and council consideration.
Was there any major issues at the stakeholder meeting?
No. You know, there was interest in the capacity at land application and how, you know, because, and actually Daryl shared, I believe it was on this slide, that compared to most communities that he's done, that $9 is very low.
Sewer side, yeah.
So in many communities, because the cost of sewer and the cost of treatment facilities, that side is normally much higher. And again, the 20 million helps to offset some of that, so don't forget that. But you know, there was question around that. How long can we anticipate with land app, and what are you looking at there? You know, and what I shared with them is we are looking at options. We have several initiatives that we're looking at to set the city up for future capacity. And right now, those are low cost initiatives. But just as a reminder, you know, the city built land application site in 1998 or 99 to the cost of about $47 million. And that was for 6 million gallons of capacity. In 2010, we expanded that site 3 million gallons at $48 million. $16 million per million gallons. So what we're looking at, are there advantages or changes in our site that we can make at a lower cost where we could gain 1 million gallons or so? And if we can do that at a low cost, that could save not only ratepayers but developers, you know, significant sums of money in the future. So And right now, we've got plenty of capacity at land application site. We've got, of the 9 million, we're only running somewhere around, between 5 and 5.4 or so, depending on the weather, because we do have weather impacts with our facility. So we do have availability in capacity at sewer, so that does help us. In addition, we have an agreement with the base for 1 million gallons of treatment toward the base, so that helps. So total treatment capacity right now, we're somewhere around 10 million gallons.
And do we have land mass to support growth out there if needed?
Some of the things we're looking at are engineering evaluations and other things that haven't been updated since the 70s. And at least some of our initial studies show that there may be ways to gain additional disposal capacity without adding significant land or major additional infrastructure. So we're looking at those options.
And plus with the technology that developing, you can save a lot of money by repairing things like that pipe, that
Yes.
sock inside the pipe. You take a 50-year-old pipe, make it like new again, and at a very low cost. So that helps keep this low, I imagine.
Absolutely, and that's actually figured in. The I&I projects in our capital improvement plan are actually figured in.
So that's always a good thing. I mean, for me, learning about the CIP and how everything's structured to keep our costs down, and plus analysis from Mr. Parker here kind of puts everything in better perspective, what to do this every 5 years.
And one other piece to this, we're talking about the analysis, but part of Daryl's scope was to create a model for us. So as we start looking at projects and programming them into the CIP, we can actually do an annual look at what decisions, how our decisions would impact that fee. And if that fee, if you add a $40 million project, all of a sudden that fee could be out of alignment. So we would have a model to actually tell us that. So now, I will say the model gives us the opportunity to look at it every year. The general statute says we'll hire a financial consultant to do the analysis every 5 years, whether we've looked at it every year or not. So, but we at least will have that in-house tool.
So I've got a couple questions.
Sure.
So you mentioned capacity. Can you tell us how much capacity we got besides just what it's built for and what we've got? And
So
how do you calculate that? Because I want a further question about your ERUs.
okay, so the capacity, the treatment capacity is very easy. You have a permitted amount. So that's kind of a hard number. On the water side, we used our wells. So we have, the state permits all of our wells. So our well permitted capacity is somewhere around somewhere close to 6 million gallons a day.
Around 6.
So that gives us our water treatment capacity. On the wastewater side, our site's permitted for 9 million gallons, plus we have some with the base. Now that's for a specific area, so you can't just turn anything to it, but we do have that availability. But then you start subtracting out, like Daryl talked about, you have flow tributary to the system that takes away for that capacity, which is that I&I number. So that's where our treatment capacity comes from. The system capacity, which is the pipes and stations and those kind of things, are more off of a factor. We didn't go say, this one has 800,000 and this one has 2 million and main pump station can do 9 million. What we did is you basically say, is it 1.5? Is that what we used for? So our system capacity is about 1.5 times what our treatment capacity is. So that's how we derived the capacities.
So could you go back to the ERU slide? Because I kind of find that
This one.
ERU a little bit more, where we gave the definition.
Oh, that's more toward the end.
Okay.
Right.
Where
Next one,
the
right there.
that right there.
Okay.
Yeah. So when someone comes and buys into the system, they pay, then their supposed allocation is 360 gallons a day. Right? Is that what it, gallons per day?
If they're one ERU. yeah.
Yes.
Right. So you're
360.
buying a house and you're saying,
Right.
we're going to allocate them 360.
Right.
So that's, in my math, 10,500 gallons a month, right? 30 times
But that doesn't mean they
36.
have to use that.
I understand that.
That's
but
how
I'm
much
saying
capacity you're
that's how much you have
holding
to
for them.
pay for.
Right.
Because,
Yeah.
you're saying it's 30 times 36.
That's the capability. That's the
But that's
demand
where
they
they're
could
getting charged.
be there.
They're getting
Right.
charged for those gallons.
Right.
And so, obviously, I mean, I hope nobody here uses 10,000 gallons a month, or you would be screaming when you got your bill every month. So where does that go? I mean, because I remember when we did allocation, you had, you use that number. Does that come off your capacity, or you wait to see what's the actual usage?
You end up, I don't know if I understand that question completely.
Well, I'm just saying, okay, if you say you've got 100,000 capacity, and you say, okay, every time we do one, do we take off 360?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. With the state, you have a permitted capacity, and actually the state gets more detailed. They do track every facility that we have. So Ellis Pump Station has a different capacity than
Right.
Kensington Pump Station. So if somebody builds a house in this basin, we then have to subtract that capacity all the way down the string, down the line. Now, typically, we don't do it per house.
Right.
Typically, you do it per development. So if somebody submits a 100-lot subdivision, once we approve it, we've said we will dedicate the capacity to that 100 lots. So we then, with the state, we have allocated that capacity.
Okay, it is assumed that one ERU requires a standard level of this.
That's right.
Who
But
makes the
that-
assumption?
The state. That comes right out of
Okay, right
2T
from the
rules.
state.
Mhm.
Okay.
So what's going to happen on Gum Branch, that big development that's supposed to be, that's like, what, 800-900 houses, right? So what
Yes.
happens in an area like that when you have so much demand?
Well, that's part of the reason we're building the Western Regional system.
that.
So so a portion of that could go through our existing system, but we could never handle that entire development through our existing system. Plus, there's additional demand or vacant land within those basins. So what we did is we actually looked at different methods. We looked at, all right, well, if we have all this vacant land developed, we looked all the way down to pipe size. What pipes do we have to increase and replace? What lift stations do we have to replace? And basically, it wasn't a one-for-one wash. I'm not going to say it was. But what we found is if we built one new facility that could handle future growth in that area, plus intercept some of that base flow from those other basins, you now end up with a dual benefit of you're providing for growth in that area, plus you're allowing for future growth in these other basins that you're now directing to that new lift station.
Gotcha.
So that's how we're handling, especially like that one that you're talking about. And, they're talking about multifamily also that could be up above that number,
Yeah.
which we're excited to see.
And kind of go back to Mr. Thomas's question, so on a person's water bill, what's the max allowed gallons they get?
There's not a max allowed, but we did
Well, not max
do
to max, but what's the minimum? I'm sorry, what's the minimum, like?
2,000 gallons. So their base fee is 2,000 gallons per month. That's what's in their base fee. So if they use no more than 2,000 gallons a month, and I apologize, I'm not going to remember the exact number. I think it's somewhere around $53 or $54. That's what they get, those 2,000 gallons for that number, for that amount of money. So that's the monthly fees. Back to your 360, we actually, when Greg was here, we actually did an internal exercise to analyze actual usage. And we used 2 basins where we had flow meters at the pump stations that were controlled. So we could clearly define those areas and attribute that usage to those areas. And they were fairly new, so the assumption was there would be less I&I than if you did that same study in Northwoods. Or Bryn Mawr, or even downtown, probably the worst, right, with terracotta lines. So we picked an area where we thought the I&I would be the least. And basically, what we determined that the average usage, and I know that one was Carolina Forest, I don't remember if the other was Williamsburg Plantation, but I know one was Carolina Forest. The average usage was about 260 gallons per day. So that was
6,000 gallons is the average.
Yeah, that's what we found through our study, was about 260, because we actually went and looked at nothing exceeded 300 gallons per day, because we talked to the state about, I'm trying to remember why we did this. I think it's while we were under the special order by consent, and we had limited capacity that we could give out. I think we went to the state and said, we can show through our studies that the 360 is not the real number for us. Will you let us use this lower number? And I can't remember the answer. I don't remember what
Because all
happened.
that brings in mind those ladies saying that if they don't use as much water as their neighbor, for example,
Yeah.
because they're older or what have you, why am I paying the same thing?
That's right.
Type phenomenon. So then you covered that as far as the block and everything, because some of their older generations don't use as much water as somebody else, but they're paying the same thing.
And I mean, the newer stuff does, your new washing machine, your new dishwasher.
Yeah, that's right.
everything.
That's the biggest savings
They
right
don't-
there.
They don't use what they used to.
That's right.
That kind of thing.
So especially if somebody has a 20-year-old washing machine, I guarantee you it uses 5 times the amount of a new HE washing machine. Washing machine's one of the biggest. It doesn't clean the same either, but just my opinion. But it does use, it uses a lot less water, a lot. And actually, when Sabrina came and talked to you about the rate model, she actually mentioned that the industry over the last, I don't know if it's 10 years, has actually dropped in water demand per person because of those things. Everything's more energy and water efficient, so per person you're using less.
Thank you.
Oh, that sounds good. Do we have time for open discussion? I mean, we've pretty much had all that already.
Is there any other questions on this?
So, were you done?
I think we're done. Daryl, do you have anything to add? I think that, we try to have a transparent process. The law doesn't require the stakeholder meeting. The law doesn't require this discussion. I think these add value to that process. We want developers and builders to understand that while there is a fee, it is important. That's how we prepare for the future. It's not fair to ask a ratepayer to just upfront all the incremental development growth-related costs. So those are things that, I think a process like this helps to highlight.
Well, they should have been really happy because
Yeah,
last time we changed it was like triple.
Yeah, it was.
It was like.
And we went from
1,700 to 50,000.
Yeah, we went from 1,750 to 5,100 and something, and then from 5,000 to 6,100.
Got one more comment. Since the last meeting, I spoke to Tom Nickel.
Oh, okay. How's he doing?
He's doing as good as he can be doing right now.
That's great.
He's got a long way to go, but he's He's watching us and telling us to keep our nose to the grindstone, and we're thinking about him, he's thinking about us. Pardon me?
Can you take visitors or?
I didn't get that far, but yeah,
I'll call.
sounds like it. Yeah.
Well, it's good to hear, Mr. Nichols. It's been quite a voice around here, and we've a lot to learn from that gentleman. So, of course, we all wish him well. Wally, if that's it, do we have any additional comments or discussions that we'd like to cover? All right, well, hearing none, I mean, the discussion part is always good, and then I'd like to thank Mr. Parker for coming down and briefing us on all this. I know it's a mandatory thing, but it lightens everyone on the procedures. Of course, we'd like to thank the staff and Mr. Hart and even Lisa and Alan that are working back there, making all this stuff happen over here, and appreciate the councilman being down here. If there are no further discussions or questions, our next regular scheduled meeting will be May 9th at 5:30 at the same location. If there are no other business, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? All right. We're adjourned.